Let's do the first one.
First one? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, we'll figure out our groove as time goes on. But yeah, thanks for joining me. Always fun to chat. Okay, first question for you. As somebody who's managing a bunch of high spend accounts, what's the biggest difference in paid advertising this year in 2025 versus only 2 years ago?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference now is the level of automation that is actually uh, functional with Meta. Where in 2023 they were still kind of coming out of that post iOS phase, and you really still had to find ways to install levers on your campaigns to maintain control. Now a lot of those levers are really unnecessary, and they've also kind of sunsetted a lot of the uh, tools that advertisers would use to have more granular targeting and optimize their campaigns. Really now it's just broad audiences are the main way to go. Interest targeting, you hear whispers of it around the ad community, but actually from the top down, they've actually stopped supporting interest targeting, meaning there's no active updates to those interests and what happens. So some smaller advertisers are finding performance in certain pockets with interest targeting, but kind of now the BAU standard is just broad audiences, or advantage audiences, as Meta calls it. The other element now is account composition, where, a couple of years ago, you used to have a really clear kind of audience segments and funnel strategy, and you'd have a lot of variety in what you could do and what you would bid after. Now it's really just about making sure you're testing a ton of creative and you're putting a lot of creative into the system, and that your account is set up in a way that's going to allow Meta to distribute the budget to the best ad kind of on its own. Um, you know, account or auction overlap is a big, kind of talking point with a lot of the higher spend accounts, because the way I describe it is like Meta's targeting is kind of like when you have multiple campaigns, it's kind of like having multiple people talk into like one ChatGPT instance. The machine learning will get, confused very fast because you have all these different opinions and objectives and settings, and on the account level and on the page level, Meta is really just trying to determine which ad to deliver out of that account to that certain, person. um, so consolidating, streamlining your campaigns is essential.
So,
um,
what does that do for your campaign structure then? If it's now about account consolidation, creative testing, having no interest targeting, uh, does that streamline the setup or does it just make it more difficult to figure out who to target?
Yeah, what it does is it changes the targeting to the creative conversation, meaning rather than the advertiser, leveraging their tactics, that have worked for them and then how they set up the ad sets, it's really more about informing the creative team on what to build and why. So something that's working right now and for this is what we call persona testing, where you might batch your ads in separate ad sets still, but each ad set is actually going to be speaking to a different customer type. And you'll have, five concepts for the female 45 plus who is likely interested in cosmetics, maybe another ad set to the, aspiring, that's more aspirational, or another ad set that's more product focused. Um, it comes down to really organizing your ad sets based on kind of what the creative is speaking to.
So it's almost like you can still interest target and you can still split up users based on their customer demographics, but you're doing it at the ad level. And Meta is just so good at figuring out what type of creative is going to land with which customer. So divvying your ad sets based on creative is how you're going to accomplish the same level of testing.
Yeah, exactly. And having it split out on ad sets just gives you a lever to kind of distribute spend to ones that are performing better or ones that you want to focus on.
So how do you split that
Um,
up then? Is it like UGC versus curated content versus images? What? Yeah, how do you approach divvying that?
Yeah, it really depends. So, some of our accounts, we just put it all together in one ASC campaign, but first we will test it. So, meaning we'll run it in an ABO and give it dedicated spend, and then usually those concepts are delivered by here's 5 UGC concepts, or here's 5 concepts for this product specifically, or here's 5 concepts for this customer type. And then we'll test it, and we'll usually choose the best one out of that batch and then cycle that into our ASC scale campaigns.
And then how much are you
Um,
spending on these testing campaigns before you figure out if it's scalable?
Yeah, it really depends what we do is we look at the account budget or total like monthly budget, and then we try to siphon off around 10 to 15% of that that'll be applied to creative testing. So if you have an account that spends maybe $1 million a month, you might allocate, 100K to testing creative. And then out of that 100K, you would, obviously divide that down to your daily budget of about 333 or sorry, 3,300 per day. And then you can say, okay, 3,300 per day for testing. That gives me room for about X amount of concepts. Usually it's about $500 a day per concept.
So is your creative
Um,
testing running in tandem as your ABO campaigns?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So the creative testing is the ABO, and then the scale campaign is what the ads get cycled into when we find winners.
Right, right, right. Got it.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Uh,
So,
and
what I guess what level of importance would you place on organic content with succeeding on your paid ad campaigns?
yeah, it really depends. We don't lean a lot on organic. On smaller accounts, it can be very helpful. Sometimes we'll find really good ads that the organic team posted out as an organic post, and we'll find the ad and deploy it as a paid ad, or we'll have it edited to have more of a call to action. Um, we do work with some creators that do strictly organic UGC or sorry, short form vertical videos. And oftentimes they'll come up with a viral video and it'll crush organically. So then we just swipe it and move it into the ad account. Maybe do a soft edit on it to add more of a call to action, but most of the time those transfer really well. Um, the key is just uh, finding short form vertical videos that have a lot of virality and shareability. Uh,
Got
and
it.
every now and then the brand will post something that does that, and you can swipe it.
So if it does well organically, it'll probably do well in paid ads, but otherwise you're intentionally splitting up your content on organic versus paid.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. Next big question for you. I know we've talked a lot about this off camera, but attribution, especially as your spend gets a lot higher, figuring out where your purchases are coming from and which platform they're coming from is pretty difficult. How do you figure this out
Mhm.
with high spend accounts?
So it really depends on what the client, what problem the client is trying to solve, and understanding how their traffic is kind of interplaying in their entire ad ecosystem. So high volume accounts generally are running, the common mix, mostly Meta, then second Google, maybe some TikTok. There might be some Bing in there and some App Lovin'. Most of the time, our focus will be on looking at Facebook's traffic and how that's being reflected in the rest of the account. So on the larger brands that are using a tool like Northbeam, for instance, will really, for instance, one problem we were able to help solve for a client was like they, have an enormous budget, but they're completely over indexed on retention because they've gone all in on the automation ASC strategy, and the audiences that are in their exclusion list as far as previous customers, there's what's called a pretty big leakage, meaning like, maybe they send 1 million records back to Meta that are their customers, but Meta is only able to match maybe 75% of those records back to a profile. That means you have, about 250,000 people that are still getting marketed to that shouldn't be in those prospecting campaigns. Um, so because of that leakage, we've kind of helped determine a few different like strategies of like optimizing and measuring for that client, and kind of shifted their team's focus from looking at just a blended ROAS on the campaign or the ad, and looking at first time ROAS. So the revenue driven by that first time customer versus the revenue driven by previous customers. And breaking that down in Northbeam has been really important because just by shifting that team's focus and attention to a new KPI has had a trickle down effect on the decision making all the way down to the analysts that are looking at which ad should we scale or kill. Um, and then second to that, we also implemented like new visit percentage and new customer percentage as a KPI on the campaign. So you have some ads that maybe they have a little bit lower ROAS. However, their new visit percentage is extremely high. That's a pretty good sign that that ad is having more of an incremental impact on the business than maybe another ad that has, a 10% new visit percentage but a crushing ROAS, and you're really that ad's just doing retargeting, and there's nothing that's going to say that other than the hard click data. So really, it's using Northbeam to kind of find those pockets of incrementality and where you can lean into, and then deploying tactics that are going to support your overall objective of gaining, new visitors or sometimes it's previous customers. You have a really strong acquisition engine, but there's a gap in the customer cohort that's not getting the retention marketing. Maybe there's lapsed customers that have purchased within the last 2 years or haven't purchased in 2 years. They were customers, maybe in 2023 that because we're excluding customers, maybe we're missing that audience and we need to rebuild on the retention side.
That's really interesting.
Um,
So I guess
so
it's just about making your budget more efficient and finding when you should be advertising to your customers. Because it's easy to get a 10 ROAS if you're retargeting existing customers and it's a consumable product, like let's say makeup, people are going to buy it all the
yeah,
time anyways. But you're
yeah,
probably just wasting your ad budget when they would buy it anyways, and you should be spending that money acquiring new
exactly.
customers.
Exactly. It's all about that incrementality. Like, would they have bought the product anyways? Do we need to market to them, or is that budget better allocated elsewhere?
Right. That way you're
Uh,
not, I guess, chasing your tail for lack of a better term.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And even analyzing the customer cohorts is a big portion of it, and figuring out the LTV cycle and the payback cycle on different products. So, with one brand, we came in and we looked at they had a product that we found had a really high new customer rate, and it had a repeat customer rate very close. So they would buy this product at a high conversion rate, and then they'd also come back and buy another product maybe a month later. Um, that product wasn't getting a lot of advertising dollars in the system that they had. So it was just kind of saying, all right, hey, this might be a good product for us to focus on as a brand to achieve that new customer percentage, but also make sure that there's a payback, in the short term with their repeat,
That's interesting. And I
customer
think
rate
that's
on that
sometimes one of the
specifically.
most difficult things for a brand to do because you'll normally have like between 1 to 5 top sellers. And it's easy to see in Shopify, okay, this is where all of our revenue comes from. So that's where we're going to focus our advertising. But until you get granular and you figure out like what the repeat customer rate is or what the cost per acquisition is on every single product, you probably wouldn't find that information.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it's important to have tools like Northbeam or really in-depth analytics on the brand side that can help you slice and dice that data and make those
So
decisions.
for the brand that we were just talking about, you said really high budget. Can you help everybody understand what a high budget is?
Yeah, in this case, it's upwards of 7 million a month in spend.
What is that daily? Is that like 200 grand a day?
Yeah, about 200 to 250K a day. Sales days, we might hit half a million a day in spend. Um,
That's
and
unbelievable. That's how do you operate at that level? Like it's I feel like there's little margin for error. I guess all the numbers just scale upwards, but I guess mentally,
yeah.
how do you go about spending that much?
I think the key is just really good systems and processes, and it's a team that's managing it. So making sure that there's quality checks and SOPs before things get changed. A lot of the edits to the account happen on a very routine basis. So when you're spending at that scale, you're not day trading because you might make a budget adjustment on Monday at 5 o'clock, you're not really going to see that full daily budget reflected probably till Wednesday because of Meta's 7-day pacing algorithm.
Wow.
So there's a lot of decision. It's like flying an aircraft carrier, or sorry, it's like driving an aircraft carrier versus a speedboat. Like you really are planning out in advance. A lot of the decisions actually get made off platform. So the data gets exported, once or twice a week. The analysts do an audit on the data. Um, Looking for the KPIs that essentially assigned that we want to find. determine which ads to turn off, which ads to scale in. We might make some campaign adjustments, and then a lot of the, I guess, different than small accounts, the cadence and the timing is just very rhythmic and routine, and it's actually in some ways easier to manage because the Meta machine is doing most of the heavy lifting, because you're working with it, not against it, trying to day trade.
I
Um,
think it would be easy though for an inexperienced media buyer to see that and just get completely lost and look at ROAS or CPA data when it's virtually
yeah,
irrelevant when you're spending $250,000 a day.
exactly. Yep. And Meta's going to report one thing that might be completely counterintuitive to what Northbeam's reporting. And, we're looking for the type of customer, not just a customer. We're looking for a specific sale on a specific product that we know has a incremental impact on the business.
So interesting. That's so well. This has been super insightful. I already feel like I learned a lot
Yeah.
just in this short conversation.
Mhm.
But yeah, thanks so much for
Cool.
chatting. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to catching up next week.
Awesome. Likewise. Thanks a
Thanks
lot.
everybody for
Talk soon.
joining. Take care.